So, dear friends, dear devotees, again, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me for this, giving this seminar. The seminars based on a book that I've written called Intelligence or Chaos, and it's basically trying to connect modern science with Vedanta philosophy, with Vaishnavism. And as I mentioned yesterday, the end of the 19th century was the golden age of atheism. It started the intellectual pursuit of basically um, destroying religion. I mean, that sounds very aggressive, but in the end, if you read um, philosophers and scientists like Richard Dawkins, then you can clearly see he's probably one of the most kind of outspoken atheists. He's really fanatical in preaching his atheistic philosophy. And so, yeah, they're trying to destroy it. And he believes, he wrote a book, The God Delusion. The subtitle of my book is The Atheist Delusion. So it's a direct attack on their attack. And that's the nature of the material world also. You know, there are different points of view and people attack one another. So it's not easy to find truth in this world. In fact, it's very complicated. I was just walking around and doing a japa walk, and I noticed this big mosque next door. Very friendly people invited me. They had food everywhere and all kinds of sweets. And I walked up to one gentleman. He was clearly dressed in the Muslim garb, and he said he was actually a Christian from Colombia. And he started talking to me in Arabic. He says, Arabic is not my strongest point. And I said, no, not mine either, because I'm from Colombia and I was a Catholic, but I was converted to Islam. And then he started preaching to me really heavy. He said, no, very gently, yeah, but very intense. He says, you're a member of this group, right? I said, yeah. And I said, we respect all religions. Our point of view is that God is great, Allah Akbar. And so he's unlimited, and therefore he has unlimited names and appearances and forms in which he manifests himself. And that could be, Allah, could be Krishna, Vishnu, Jehovah. God is unlimited. So you can't just pin it down to just one single name and one single revelation, that's it. It says, we believe there have been many revelations from prophets, enlightened personalities, devotees that have preached about the existence of God and the importance for humanity to recognize that we are subordinate and that there's a higher power and that we should respect that higher power. In fact, according to Vaishnava philosophy, we should not only respect that higher power, we should learn how to love that higher power, which is even higher. As we know, there are different relationships that one can have with Krishna: Santarasa, Dasharasa, Sakyarasa, Vatsalyarasa, Madhuyarasa. So we can see there's a scale in which we can appreciate and respect Krishna in different ways, and from different attitudes and different emotions, and that's all fine. And so we respect all religions. I respect your religion. I hope you respect our religion. We don't necessarily want to fight over it because God is one. He's one entity, the supreme person. And they say, yeah, that's true, but you have all these images that you worship, and this is really prohibited in the Quran. I say, okay, I don't want to argue with you about what is prohibited in your religion and what is prohibited in let's say, in our religion. It's not that important. We have different cultures in the world. Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago. Mohammed appeared 1,400 years ago. Buddha appeared 3,000 years ago. Christ, Jesus appeared 2,000 years ago. So there's many revelations, many ways in which God manifests himself in order to try to educate humanity to the point, is what I mentioned before, that humanity should recognize that there is a superior being and we should serve that superior being. And we should recognize our position as subordinate and respect that and learn to love it. So, anyway, the discussion kind of stalled there. And, it was clear that he was not going to accept my point of view, but he was very gentle, he was very kind, he was very friendly, and so was I. So we departed respectfully. So my point is, it's very difficult to find truth. There are so many different religions, and there are so many different atheistic point of views or agnostic point of view. So how within this jungle of philosophies and teachings and religions, how do you find something that is kind of stands out, that makes sense, that kind of transcends all the other ones? And fortunately, and I can say for myself, and I think we all agree here in this room, we have been very fortunate. And that sounds kind of like privileged, which is dangerous, of course, when once religious people start thinking that they are privileged, that they are better than others, or that they are specially, chosen by God or something like that. That's very bad. That's not good. It always leads to fanaticism. It leads to senses of superiority, arrogance, which is exactly the opposite of what spiritual life is really supposed to be. The essence of spiritual life, as I mentioned yesterday, is that we are the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. So I'm also the servant of that gentleman, and that is professing his Muslim faith, and I can respect that. So we are privileged, yet we have to recognize that we are not privileged. We are privileged that we have had the great fortune of meeting Srila Prabhupada directly, indirectly. I had the great fortune of meeting him personally, and so did Maharaj. And others have learned to know him indirectly after he departed this world, and who carried on his tradition and his teachings. And I think we can all be very proud of that the movement has been able to survive and expand and grow, and kept its purity and kept its essence of Vaishnava philosophy, and being able to spread that in a very mature way around the world. It's very impressive. So we can all be very proud of that, and we consider ourselves very fortunate that we had this encounter with Srila Prabhupada and got to know this truth of Vaishnava philosophy. And again, that sounds like we are very privileged, and yes, we are. It's if you look at it, and I mentioned that yesterday also, that I've really looked at pretty much every religion on this planet, every philosophy, studied them, some in depth, some of them a bit more superficially, but still trying to understand the essence. And really, there's nothing that compares to Vaishnava philosophy. It's really a fact. And so if we come now to the point of atheism, we're talking about the jungle of philosophies and the jungle of religions, and then there's also the jungle of atheists and agnostics. So how do we deal with that? And especially the powerful enemy that we are being confronted with is what is science. And I know many devotees, they often think that science is in a way it's a product of Kali Yuga, and in a way it's the enemy of spirituality, it's the enemy of religion, it's the enemy of Krishna consciousness. But that's not actually true. It has been, for sure. As I mentioned, the 19th century and the 20th century saw a great rise of atheism, a great flourishing of all kinds of atheistic philosophies, supported by apparently very strong arguments. If you read Dawkins' books about evolution and about why God doesn't exist for this or that reason, you can get impressed by that, and you can get, it may create some doubt, especially for people that are kind of on the fence and don't really know, and they're trying to research everything, trying to figure everything out. What is, it's not easy. So what I've tried to do is lay out what are the basic arguments of atheists and deal with them point by point and see the logic or the illogic behind it. And in my book, I point out there are 4 principles upon which atheism is based. The first principle is the notion that the universe is basically a combination of atoms and void. You have an infinite amount of atoms, and you have an even bigger infinite amount of void. And the atoms and the void, they coexist, but they are disconnected. So this is what is called in philosophy, it's called pluralism. Pluralism means that you have a universe consisting of many different individual parts that are disconnected. And because they are disconnected and they are moving around over a period of millions and millions or billions and billions of years, the atoms that are bumping into one another, at a certain point, by accident, they form a stable kind of configuration. And that stable configuration leads to an even bigger, more complex, stable configuration, all by accident. Now, if you build that up over billions and billions of years, you get something, according to this philosophy, that is so stable that it can create the most incredibly complex things that we can possibly imagine, like our cells. I mentioned our body has 80 trillion cells. Try to imagine that. And all these cells, they're working together. And they're all different. You know, you have a cell that becomes your big toe. You have a cell that becomes part of your ear. You have a cell that becomes part of your nose. You have a cell that becomes part of your heart. And they all have their instructions. They have their DNA, and they're all functioning incredibly perfectly smooth. So that we can just sit here and function as if, you know, it's the most normal thing in the world. That we have these 80 trillion cells doing all these things, you know, in perfect harmony and in perfect synchronization, perfectly stable, perfectly predictable. This idea that from something very simple, something very complex can arise by accident, that's the essence, that's the first point, the first argument of atheism. That's their worldview. The second worldview, which is connected to the first one, the second point of atheism, is that there is only matter. The only thing that exists in the universe is matter. And anything supernatural, anything beyond matter, outside of matter, or a guiding intelligence, or a God, or a spirit, or some other kind of energy than matter, just simply doesn't exist. Now, we know that this is not correct, because even in science itself, it's been proven that there is much more than matter. In fact, matter is only a byproduct of energy. So this is the discovery that, in fact, completely wiped out this argument, that there is nothing outside of matter. In fact, matter is only a byproduct. Everything is outside of matter because everything is energy. And energy transforms itself, and sometimes into a spiritual form and sometimes into a material form. This is explained in the Vedas, how Krishna has two energies, material energy and spiritual energy. So the material energy, however, is also a transformation of the spiritual energy. So this whole idea that there's only matter and there's nothing outside of it, it's already debunked by science itself. But still, if you read Dawkins, you read his book, that's what he says. Yeah, there's nothing, in fact, that's his definition of atheism. His definition of atheism, that nothing exists outside of matter. And if there's something that we don't understand, it's only because science is not yet sufficiently advanced to be able to explain it. In due course of time, we will be able to explain it and find a naturalist explanation for why there is something that we cannot understand right now. So that's his point of view. These two points together, pluralism and materialism, that's the essence of atheism. It's called materialism. So that's the second argument that is being used and expounded upon by atheists. The third one is kind of interesting. The third atheistic viewpoint is that the universe most likely has no beginning. They were of the opinion, most atheists were of the opinion that the universe is eternal. It's called the steady state theory. And this theory, and I did mention that yesterday also, that in the 1920s, this theory changed. But before that, even Einstein believed that the universe was eternal and that it was kind of stable, and that even though there was gravity, there was another force, the cosmological constant, that kept the whole thing stable and the same and predictable. Einstein had to give up that theory because Hubble discovered that the universe indeed had a beginning. because of the expansion of the universe. So that kind of changed everything. And so according to Dawkins, he says probably the universe did not have a beginning, but he's a scientist, so he also believes now the Big Bang and that it did have a beginning. He says, but if it did have a beginning, like a Big Bang, then the beginning source has to be of ultimate simplicity. So if you say that the beginning of the Big Bang was created by God, then God is a complex being. So God could not have been the beginning because he himself is complex. So he had to have had a creator himself. So you get this infinite regression. So God was created by another God who was created by another God because they were all complex beings. So therefore, Dawkins says, no, there was no God because God is complex and therefore he could not have been the original beginning point of the universe because he's complex. So it's a very interesting argument because it, in a sense, connects to the first two, but it also precisely shows where this philosophy is wrong. Because what he is saying, basically, that something is coming from nothing. Because if you say that something is of ultimate simplicity, what does that mean, that ultimate simplicity? Scientists have a name for it. It's called the singularity. You may have heard of this. So before the Big Bang, there was a singularity. And the singularity is exactly that. It's an infinitely small point that has no attributes, it has no qualities, and it hardly exists. And it is so incredibly infinitely small that it's almost nothingness. But then, if you start saying, okay, it's almost nothingness, but yet it's not completely nothingness, because if it were totally nothingness, it's a whole different story. No, it is somethingness, but it's so incredibly small that it's almost nothingness. But if you start describing that it's, the singularity, it's almost nothingness, and it's an infinitely small point where there's an infinite amount of pressure, an infinite amount of mass and energy concentrated, all of this, that's not very simple anymore. Already just this description of compression and energy and concentration and infinitely small, already when you're describing something like that, that doesn't qualify as ultimate simple. That's rather complex already. If you describe the singularity as something that's an infinitesimally small point, full of energy, compressed at high temperature, in infinite compression, infinite temperature, infinite energy, infinite mass, all compressed in one thing, that's so tiny that it's almost nothing, that's not simple. So how do the scientists solve that problem, so-called? They say, well, even the singularity is true. It's not really that simple. It's kind of complicated. Now, the real thing, now we come to the punchline. The real thing that's really simple is nothingness. And therefore, the atheist philosophy really is that everything came from nothing. And this is what Dawkins thinks, but even Stephen Hawking, who is, as a scientist, would be rated at a higher level than Dawkins. He's a very impressive scientist. But even Stephen Hawking exactly makes that point. The whole universe came out of nothing. Nothingness is the beginning point, and it will be the end point. Now, in Vedanta philosophy, we have a principle that's called Parinamavada. You mentioned that yesterday. Parinamavada categorically states that it is impossible for something to arise from nothing. Nothingness does not exist, therefore it cannot create anything. So this whole argument that the whole universe came out of nothing, I mean, it sounds very kind of esoterical. It sounds exotic. It sounds kind of brilliant and smart. And, to reduce all of the universe into nothingness, and it somehow makes sense that out of this nothingness, this incredibly infinite complex universe arose. It's dazzling, it's bewildering, and it's complete nonsense. And so this notion that the universe came out of pure nothingness, and this is the third argument of atheism, which they are forced to accept because, the pure simple doesn't exist, as we just discussed. So you have to go even further beyond the singularity into the actual nothingness. This is diametrically opposed to Vedanta philosophy, because what is one of the names of Krishna is Bhagavan. Bhagavan means one who is full of everything. So this is the exact opposite position of theism versus atheism. Atheism says that everything is nothing, and theism says that Krishna is everything, and that everything includes everything. And out of that everything, Krishna transforms himself without himself diminishing, because he's infinite. He transforms himself and creates energy. That energy, by the way, is also eternal. We discussed that. So Krishna is eternal, his energies are eternal. We, as parts of his energy, we're also eternal. Never was there a time when we did not exist. So here is a very interesting analogy from a philosophical point of view, from an intellectual point of view. Atheism says that everything is nothing, and theism, Vaishnavism says that Krishna is everything and he's full, infinite fullness versus infinite nothingness. That's the difference between theism and atheism. Now you can choose which one is more logical. The infinite nothingness. We are sitting here, so we are definitely not nothing. And we came out of nothing. Just doesn't make any sense. Parinamavada is one of the cornerstones of the laws of logic. The laws of logic, I mentioned that yesterday. There are 3 laws of logic: law of identity, the law of contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle. And the essence of the laws of logic is to make an absolute distinction between nothingness and being, whereby nothingness does not exist, and the only thing that exists is being. That is the essence of logic. It's a very rigid, uncompromising distinction between non-being and non-being. Now, there is a problem with non-being, because we think of non-being many times as empty space, and we also think that space, we need it to move. Because if you're driving your car in the motorway, in order to move along smoothly, can be full of obstacles, trees falling over, rocks falling over, cars parked on the motorway. That would be a mess. So you need space. You need empty space to be able to move. In order, we see that the universe is full of movement, it's full of motion. So you would think that that kind of motion constantly requires empty space. Now, here is the interesting thing. There is space, but it's not empty. All space, everything, there's no emptiness anywhere in the universe. Everything is full. Brahman is everywhere. Krishna is all pervading. There's no place where Krishna is not present. There's no place where Brahman is not present. So this infinite fullness at the same time facilitates, due to the nature of energy, that it's completely flexible. So therefore energy can actually act like as if it were empty space. Now, this is very interesting, because it sounds like a mental jugglery in one sense, but it's not, because in the scientific discoveries related to quantum physics, that's exactly what scientists discovered. There is no empty space. The quantum field is full. It is infinite, it's full, it is full of potential and actual properties simultaneously. And it is what is space. So space is space, but it's not empty. So that's the third pillar of atheism, that everything has to come from something that's ultimately simple. And because God is not ultimately simple, therefore it cannot be God, which is a nonsense argument. I mean, in one sense, it's the weakest argument of all atheists. Now we come to the fourth point, the fourth argument of atheism, which is called the theodicy. Does anybody know what theodicy means? Yeah. Theodicy.
Why is there evil?
Yes, it's a problem of evil. And in fact, most philosophers, historians, and theologians and religious people recognize that this is a problem. Because if God is all powerful, and if God is all loving and full of compassion, and he's all powerful. There's no limit to his power and his capability to create. Why would he have created the universe, the one that we are in, which is full of imperfections? It's from our point of view as human beings, we get born, we grow old, get sick, we die. No, whatever way you look at it, even if you have a wonderful life, no disease, no pain, no suffering, everything, smooth, your career, you make money like crazy, you worship, you're a rock star, you're whatever. Everything is perfect for you. Still, you have to die. And just the thought, the knowledge that you have to die is already suffering. Just that fact, even though your life is perfect. So just these things. And then, of course, we look at the universe. Is this universe, if you would say, let's say I'm God, and I have the unlimited power to create a universe, how would I try to create it? I would create it like a paradise, and it would be fantastic. And, all the things that we read about of Vaikuntha, right? We would create Vaikuntha, but only Vaikuntha, no material world, just Vaikuntha, just Sat Chit Ananda, eternal existence, unlimited bliss, unlimited knowledge. That's what I would do if I were God. So, but fortunately I'm not. Because Krishna, he is even his, and if you come to the crucial point, his magnanimity is so great that he creates living souls. There's also eternal, but still we are created in the sense that we are dependent on its source, which is Krishna. And a soul, a jiva, is defined by the fact that he's a person. He has consciousness. And what is the essence of consciousness? The essence of consciousness is that you are independently conscious. You are an independent center of awareness, of action, of willpower, of desires, of emotions and intelligence, and you're independent. And that independence can mean that you can move within the creation in a way as you choose. On the other hand, you are dependent. You're not totally independent. You are dependent because you're part of a bigger whole. Just like we are sitting here in this room, and we are confined to this room, right? So, and you're sitting there, I'm sitting here, and we're all here, and we all have to behave in a certain way because I'm not alone. We have to be nice to one another. We have to be respectful. You have to be polite. You have to act in a certain way. We are constantly surrounded by other beings, persons, material objects. So we are not alone. We constantly have to take into consideration that there are other people, that there are other realities. So we are not alone, which means even though we are independent, yet our independence is capsulated into what we call the cosmic order. So just like we are citizens of Germany, of Holland, and we have an independence, but we have laws. If you're a citizen of Germany, there are laws. You have to abide by the German laws. If I'm a citizen of Holland, I have to abide by the Dutch laws. So even though I'm an independent citizen, and I basically can do what I want, but yet I can't. Because if I'm smart, I will comply with the cosmic order. So the cosmic order, basically recognizing that I'm a part of a greater whole, that means I'm the servant of the greater whole. So rather than trying to master it over and be the ultimate controller of everything, which is our disease, that's why we entered into this material world, we have to learn how to cooperate with the cosmic order and be part of it in harmony. So, but yet this independence is there. A soul can choose that he may want to have more power than he actually has. And the soul may choose that he wants to be a little bit God. He wants to have some creative power. Because one of the things, one of the real, if you talk about God, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Is the one who has the power to create. So that power, it's attractive. Power is attractive. Now we know that Krishna has 6 opulences, Bhagavan. Three of these opulences are kind of internal opulences. It's his beauty, his intelligence, his detachment or his state of blissfulness. Then there are external attributes. He's famous, he's rich, and he has infinite power. If you look at that spectrum of properties, it's a beautiful description. I mean, it's brilliant. And if you look at that spectrum of properties, there are two that are kind of, in a way, opposite: love and beauty on the one hand, and power on the other hand. Now, if you love someone, and if it's pure love, according to Vaishnava philosophy, you are totally absorbed in the object of love. You don't care about yourself. You're not thinking about your power and your this or your that or your ego. You're totally absorbed in love. When you're attracted to power, it's a little different, slightly different, because power is got something to do with the ego, because you are then that center of power. So rather than dedicating all your energy to the object of love, you start dedicating the energy towards yourself a little bit. I enjoy this power. I can create. And Krishna is very kind. He gives you the power to create. When you want to get more power, Krishna will give it to you. And he will even create a material universe for you so you can play around in that universe and play God. Now, Krishna also says, if you do that, make sure that the power that you have, use it in my service. So be a demigod, be a Lord Brahma, be a great Lord Brahma, the master of the universe, but always in service of Krishna. When you do that, basically it's not a problem. So sometimes, and even in Vaishnava circles, we think that there's a very kind of stark distinction between the material world and the spiritual world. It's like, the material world is all bad, and the spiritual world, of course, is all good. So the spiritual world, of course, is all good. So there's no question about that. But the material world, it's not all bad. If you look at the upper parts of the material world, heavenly planets, the sattvic realm, they are on the highest level, very similar to the quality of life in the spiritual world. That's explained, Srila Prabhupada explained that several times. There's explanations about that. So the higher levels of the material world, the quality of life is very similar to, comparable. There is no suffering. You live like almost for eternity. The life of Brahma is billions and billions and billions of years. And it's pretty much perfect, except that you end at a certain point. You do die. Even Lord Brahma does die. So that's why it's better to just stay in the spiritual world and not even take that step of stepping out of the spiritual, stepping out of Vaikuntha into the material world to try to enjoy the power in the material world. But again, if you use that power properly, it's okay. The problem starts when you start abusing that power. So rather than using it in service of Krishna, in service of the universe, in service of other beings, you start using it in your service for your own egotistical desire. The moment you do that, you start inflicting suffering on other beings. When you inflict suffering, you cause a reaction you call karma. So then you enter into the realm of karma. And that is the way down. And it's entanglement, more intoxication because of power, more transgression, more karma, and eventually you completely fall down and get entangled in the 8,400,000 species of life, which is inhabits this material universe. So the independence of a soul, which is the root cause of the theodicy, it's a root cause of evil, the abuse of that independence, but at the same time, it is absolutely necessary. Without that independence, we could not exist. So it's a question of to be or not to be. So Krishna, let's say, had the choice. Either I create, infinite souls and give them the opportunity to enjoy with me in the spiritual realm. But these souls must have individual consciousness, they must be personalities, and they must be independent. So therefore, there is a small chance that they will misuse that independence. So for that reason, he has created the material universe so that we can go through it and eventually learn our lesson and recognize that this was foolish, that the idea that I can be God and create and powerful and all of that. Yeah, you can, but it has a price. So better not to enter into that path. Better to just recognize we are eternal servants and participate in the eternal pastimes of Krishna and just be eternally happy. That is, the recommendation given by great Vaishnava acharyas and teachers and by Krishna himself. This is what you should do. As explains in the Bhagavad Gita, beautifully explained. So the theodicy, it is a serious problem. And, I explained why, but it's a lengthy explanation. It takes some time for people to sit down. It takes also some time for people to be able to absorb it, recognize it, and recognize that it makes sense. And one of the reasons it makes sense because we can see the examples all around us in this world. When do things go wrong in human society? When crazy people get too much power and start doing crazy things. Dictators, conquerors, great rulers, that want to have incredible power, and all they do is they cause suffering and problems. And we see that in recent histories, how great, powerful men have started wars and just ending up in total misery for everyone, including themselves. So there's always, that saying that pride comes before the fall. And we can see it all the time. You can see it Napoleon, you can see it with Hitler, you can see it with Stalin, you can see it with Lenin, all these guys. Always the same story. It's the attachment, intoxication with power. So therefore, fundamentally, coming back to Bhagavan and his qualities, these two extremes, there's the power of love, which is devotional service, versus the love for power, which is the material world. This sums up, in essence, the problem of the theodicy. The power of love versus the love for power. So we should learn or to not be loving or desiring power, but to simply accept our position as a humble servant and try to develop the attitude of service and love for Krishna. So going back to the path of the power of love rather than being attached to and the love of power. So these four principles form the cornerstone of atheistic philosophies in different mixtures and in different combinations, depending on the personalities that we are dealing with in this material world, depending on their individual karma. So the arguments, and I briefly discussed them, but the arguments against all these four principles are actually very strong. Especially the first three, because there is a real scientific foundation for them. There's a real, as I mentioned, for the last 100 years, science has gone through a revolution. Einstein discovering that not matter is the essence, but energy is the essence. Quantum physics realizing that there is an infinite field of energy that creates everything, that is full of energy, there's no empty space. The discovery of the Big Bang and the recognition that the universe does have a beginning point, and therefore it must have been created at a certain thing. When the Big Bang was discovered in the 1920s, I think the Pope immediately made a statement, "Oh, we won." More or less, it was like a victory lap. He said, yeah, finally, because the interesting thing is that the Big Bang was discovered by a priest. He's called Lemaitre. And he was a contemporary of Einstein, and they met several times. In fact, Lemaitre convinced Einstein of the Big Bang theory, because Einstein wouldn't have it. He didn't, he was stuck to this eternal universe concept, this steady state. And then Lemaitre says, no, he talked about what he called the primordial atom, that the whole universe came out of one single atom and then expanded and exploded. It's the Big Bang. So Hubble then confirmed Lemaitre's theory was mathematical and theoretical. Hubble was an observer, and he was through observing the universe and measuring, the movements and the motion of galaxies and planets, he discovered that the universe was expanding. So that was the empirical proof of what Lemaitre was saying. So yeah, the Pope was very happy with Lemaitre and very happy with the discovery that led to the formulation of the Big Bang and the recognition that the universe was created. It's not eternal. So the moment you talk about creation, you come to the point that who created it? That's the discussion of the singularity, and where did the singularity come from, and it came out of the almost void, and then it came out of the total void. So that whole discussion, so that was resolved, and that was a big step, because the other thing is the pluralistic universe that I talked about, that atoms moving around and bumping into one another. That pluralistic universe requires a lot of time, preferably infinity. The adherence of the steady state theory, which is atheists were very fond of that theory, because it sounds like, you have infinite void, infinite amount of atoms, and eternity. And, if you have eternity, anything can happen. So this is the famous story of, the story of the monkeys, that if you take an infinite amount of monkeys, having an infinite amount of typewriters, and you give them eternity, then eventually the monkeys will type out all the works of Shakespeare. They tested this theory, it doesn't work. They did computer simulations, it doesn't work. Because the complexity of reality is way beyond anything that could be created by random movement and random typing of monkeys. They calculated that if you take every atom in the universe and turn that into a monkey with a typewriter, every atom becomes a monkey with a typewriter, then still it wouldn't work. So it's impossible. The pluralistic universe, whereby out of chaos and chance, by random motions and particles bumping into one another, something incredible comes out of it, like a universe with planets and solar systems, and on a planet, human beings, animals, plants. It's totally ridiculous. It's absurd. It's impossible. The argument against that, mathematicians did a calculation. What is the possibility that this could have happened by chance? Now, if you take the 13.6 billion years ago that the universe was created through the Big Bang, then that already wipes out, because 13.6 billion years, it's a lot, right? We think, woo, 13.6 billion years, a lot can happen, We think we are already 1 year, we think, ooh, a lot of things can happen in a year or 50 years or in a lifetime. We were talking about 13.6 billion years. But on a cosmic scale, it's very short. If you really think about the complexity of the universe, and if the amount of time it would take by accident to create that, I mentioned the number yesterday, it's 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. It's an unbelievably large number. 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. According to mathematicians, there was one famous mathematician in the beginning of the 20th century, his name was Borel. And he said anything which is less probable than 10 to the power of minus 50, 10 to the minus 50, that turns from improbable to impossible. So that's kind of the demarcation line. So you cannot go on infinitely with saying that there's probability that will solve all the problems just by chance. No, there is a limit, 10 to the power minus 50. The chance that is needed is 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. And that also, and there's another problem with that, it's not only And it's a very complicated formula. It was calculated by Roger Penrose. But the complexity that we see in the universe has to be perpetual. It's not just that by accident one time you create something that's very complex, but it has to maintain itself. Not only maintain itself, it has to be able to procreate. DNA, that's one of the mysteries of DNA. It's not only able to maintain itself in a stable form, but it's able to procreate by splitting. Cell splitting is the basis of biological life. That's why we can exist and function. Our cells are constantly evolving and splitting and being renewed and so on. And so the DNA has that possibility of splitting itself into an identical counterpart. And in this way, you see the complexity of something that's already very complex that has to maintain itself. But not only that, it has the capability of expanding itself. So that makes the impossibility even more impossible. So it's totally impossible. So therefore, we have to come to the conclusion that God must exist. There is no pluralistic universe. There's plenty of things outside of matter, energy, basically. There is a beginning point of the universe. So God must exist. And because he must exist, therefore, the problem of the theodicy has to be understood in that context. So you can either say the theodicy, the problem of evil is such that therefore I reject anything about that has to do with anything with God as a creator of the universe. But then if you go back to then who created it? Nothingness, doesn't make any sense. So God must have created it. So you have to come to the point that you accept, yes, there is a small chance, very small chance, that the souls may abuse their independence and cause themselves harm. Now, Srila Prabhupada was explaining that, and I mentioned that yesterday also, that if you look at the population here in Germany or any Western country, the prison population in any country is about 0.03%, if I remember the number correctly. 0.3% or 0.03%, but it's very small. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining that. In the spiritual world, he says the material world, it's like a little cloud in the corner of the spiritual sky. And that little cloud is inhabited by living entities who represent a very small portion of the infinite number of souls that live in Vaikuntha forever and never ever fall down into the material world. So we are the unlucky ones, you can say, but at the same time, it's our own fault. We made that decision at one point. When, we don't know, we don't remember. Millions of years ago, we've been around for this material world. It's one of the limitations that we have as a finite soul, that our finiteness prohibits us from completely understanding everything, eternity into the future. So when we make the choice of entering into the material world in order to gain some more power so we can create a universe, we cannot fully understand all the possible things that could happen in the future for all eternity. The soul is too minute to be able to grasp that. So that's why we get sucked into it. It's a gradual process. And it's very important to understand that, because sometimes, the idea is that the soul is standing there in Vaikuntha and he's a little bored. It's hard to believe if you're in Vaikuntha, you can be bored. But let's say, he's looking, I'd like to have a little bit more power and, like to use my energy a little bit more creatively. And so, but it doesn't mean that he's looking at the material world and he's seeing all the horrible things happening there. He looks at some hellish planet, He says, yeah, that's where I want to go. No way. No soul wants to voluntarily go and enter into a state of suffering. But when he starts making mistakes because of the abuse of power, unwillingly and unknowingly, he's sucked into it. He gets entangled. This is what entanglement is. We get entangled in the material world. And in the entanglements, we lose sight and we get more entangled, up to the point that we get so frustrated that we desire to get out of this place. That is, all right, we've seen it all, we've been here for millions of years. It's not been a successful, my journey. I never became God, that was my goal. Maybe I was Brahma for a while, and that was great, but then as Brahma, I also died and I did some stupid things and kind of fell down and ended up as an ant somewhere. So it's a very complex, difficult thing, but we have to recognize that there is no alternative, because there must be a God who created this universe and who created us as individual souls with a minute independence, a very minute independence. And sometimes a very, very few souls abuse that minute independence. So we are here because we've been given the opportunity to understand this. And we're given the opportunity to rectify ourselves, to get out of this situation, go back home, back to Godhead. That's what the purpose is of this Krishna consciousness movement. As Prabhupada said so many times, he issued the magazine, Back to Godhead. It's all about going back to Godhead. And this is another important point. Srila Prabhupada was very specific about it. It's not that the soul fell from some kind of impersonal state of being. No, the soul, every soul, has been in Vaikuntha, whether it's in a Shanta rasa or the Madhurya rasa, but every soul originates from Vaikuntha. And that's why we want to go back there. That's why it's called Back to Godhead. There are some discussions and philosophical discussions also within the Vaishnava community that say that souls are not really coming from Vaikuntha, but that there's some kind of state of Tatastha Shakti, Brahman, where they are in a dormant state, and at a certain point they evolve and they start entering to the realm of the material world, and then they can carry on evolving and then hopefully become liberated. So this doesn't make any sense, because the soul is eternal, and it cannot be that in the past you were eternally ignorant, because that's what it means. If that is your philosophy, that you're eternally ignorant, then at a certain point you get the opportunity to gain some knowledge and become liberated. No, the soul is eternal, and our constitutional position is eternal, part of Krishna, servant of Krishna, in some relationship or another in the spiritual world. And that's why we have a desire to go back there, because ultimately we're not happy here in the material world. We recognize that. There are nice things also. It's not that life is all suffering. We have happy moments and nice moments, but we all know the limitations of the material world. We recognize fundamentally it's miserable. And fundamentally, this is not the place where we should be. Fundamentally, our aim and our duty and our responsibility is to try to get out of here and try to go back home, back to Godhead. So atheism, it's a powerful argument, but those who recognize this fundamental truth, they can overcome all these atheistic arguments. And then you'll see that the philosophy of Vaishnava Vedanta, Vaishnavism, is so much more powerful, and it is so much more logical, so much more common sense. So I'd like to leave it at that. See, the time changed. That is this is morning. It was an hour, but it's the time of the year that the clock is moved forward, so you have 1 hour less, basically. Yeah. So I'd like to leave it at that. Are there any questions or comments?
You talked about the complexity, and so complexity requires that there is some design, some kind of
Yes.
design. But how would that argument establish the fact that God is a person, or something like God is a blue-collared boy?
Yeah.
Would that also?
Yeah.
Because it makes sense, I think, for people to understand. Okay, there is some intelligent design, but accepting that the supreme creation happens by someone who is a person. Quite difficult.
Yeah, it's like anything to do with God is quite difficult because the whole idea that there is a supreme person controlling everything and who's, that whom we are connected with eternally, it is a mind-blowing concept, put it this way. It's so radically different from the world that we live in because, Krishna is not, we don't see him here in this world. We see him indirectly, we see the laws of nature working, we are conscious, we have all these attributes, but Krishna himself is invisible. So you come to the point of recognizing that, okay, maybe I'm not a total atheist, but I'll become an impersonalist. So I understand that, there is a field of energy and that, this purely materialistic philosophy, it doesn't make sense because it's clear that there are many things outside of matter. So let's say there's, the impersonal point of view that there's Brahman, the infinite Brahman, and that's the highest thing. And personality, well, personality is an accidental byproduct. But you run into the same problem. You're basically saying that something is created out of nothing. Because if Brahman is purely impersonal and it has no attributes, which in itself is already an attribute.
Yes.
So that's where Shankaracharya starts contradicting himself. He says Brahman has no attributes, but then it's it's effulgent and it's luminous and it's conscious and it's smart. It's a lot of attributes there. So you cannot have being without attributes. According to Vedanta philosophy, there are three fundamental principles in the universe, three elements that comprise everything. That is substance, properties, and motion. Substance called dravya, property is called guna, and motion is called karma. You cannot have one without the other. Everything that moves has substance and properties. Everything that exists must have properties and motion. And everything that has properties must have substance and movement. They're inseparable. So the idea that we are a person and God is impersonal doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Because you are basically saying that the impersonal, which is devoid of all properties, basically creates properties. Now, to get out of this problem, what do the Mayavadis say? Yeah, but the properties are not real. It's illusion, it's Maya. Ramanuja, the great opponent of Shankaracharya and the followers of Shankara, said, okay, but then if properties are illusion, is the illusion real or is it not real? Oh yeah, but the illusion is real. Well, wait a minute. The definition of illusion is that it's not real. So you're saying that that which is not real is real? Doesn't work. If you say, yeah, but illusion, it's simultaneously real and not real. Now here, this is very tricky. Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. The Mayavadis, they are trying to abuse Achintya Veda Veda Tattva and project it on Maya. Maya is inconceivable. Maya is simultaneously real, simultaneously not real, simultaneously exists, and simultaneously does not exist. It's Achintya Veda Veda Tattva kind of thing. This doesn't work because the essence of Achintya Veda Veda Tattva is that you're not dealing with things that do not exist. It's related, the oneness and the difference is related to things that all exist. The oneness exists, the manyness exists, and they exist simultaneously. But non-being does not exist. To say that non-being and being simultaneously exist and are equal is complete nonsense, because non-being does not exist. So therefore, it cannot play any part whatsoever. In my book, Intelligence or Chaos, I talk about that when we talk about non-being, we have to recognize there are two different kinds of non-being. There's relative non-being and there's absolute non-being. Relative non-being is what we use every day. Peter is not there, or John is not there, he didn't show up for the meeting, or this didn't happen and that didn't. Like things that are not there but in a relative sense, because they are not there now, but they're there later, or John is late or whatever. So relative non-being is part of reality, and it's related to the fact that things change. But it doesn't mean that they stop existing, they change. Absolute non-being is absolute non-being, therefore by definition does not exist. So non-being in the absolute sense does not exist. And this is the essence of what I mentioned, Parinamavada. The opposite of Parinamavada is Vivartavada. That's the Mayavadi philosophy. That non-being is the illusion. That being is only an illusion of non-being. So, the Mayavadis cannot get away with it. In the end, they are stuck with the fact that is this illusion real or is it not real? If it's not real, then it's not an illusion, so it's real. If it is real, then it's an illusion, which is also real. So you cannot get away from it. It's an impossible. So Ramanuja, he defeated the Mayavadis in a very powerful way. And that defeat, these arguments continue till today. The arguments haven't changed. But the clever use of Achintya Veda Veda Tattva to explain Maya, that's the last trick. It's important. They use that trick, and it's very clever.
This trick was used directly at the time of Shankaracharya, or it was used later on, like his followers?
I think it's the followers of Shankara. They were some of the great logicians and philosophers, intellectual, brilliant minds. So they came up with all kinds of arguments to try to persuade that Shankara was right. And so juggling things like this, Maya is inconceivable. Maya is simultaneously real and simultaneously not real. And so you guys are saying that too. You say that Krishna is simultaneously one and different. So we are saying, we take it one step further. We are saying that Maya is simultaneously real and simultaneously not real. Any other question?
I have one question. Is Krishna is still expanding himself? Because like the universe will be empty because always jivas are going back to Godhead. So it's like still Krishna is expanding.
Yeah. Well, Krishna is infinite, and one of the problems with infinity is that it's infinite. It's very tricky when you start dividing infinity. Divided by infinity, you're still stuck with infinity. Where you have infinity minus infinity, it's still infinite. If you have infinity plus infinity, it's still infinite. So if Krishna is infinite but still expanding, that's like a paradox, right? Because if something is already, in philosophy, you have the distinction between what is called actual infinity and potential infinity. But Krishna is both actually infinite and potentially infinite. Like for instance, a range of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a potential infinity. Because the biggest number, you'll never get there. You can never pronounce it because there's always a bigger number. But potentially, we all recognize that the range of the set of numbers is infinite. And then there's things that are already infinite, like space. Space already is infinite. There's no way that you can limit space. Because if you say, okay, there is an end to space, then what's beyond the end? There must be more space, and then more space. So space, by definition, is already an actual infinity. So Krishna is both potentially infinite and actually infinite. So he's expanding. The amount of souls is infinite. I said, the amount of souls in the material world is 0.3% or 0.03%. But 0.03% of infinity is still pretty much infinite. So infinity is kind of beats a lot of logic, although it's very logical itself, but it stretches our mind, beyond things that we ordinarily would consider impossible or illogical. So infinity is, from that point of view, is very tricky. But we better be glad it's there, because if it's impossible to imagine a finiteness to God. It's impossible. God, per definition, is infinite because space is infinite. Just that fact alone. So, yes, Krishna is expanding, and the amount of souls is infinite. And the amount of souls that are part of the infinite amount of souls, for instance, conditioned souls, that's also infinite. It's hard to understand. Our minds are finite, that's fundamentally the case. A lot of people would say that, you can never understand God because God is infinite and we are finite. But that's not entirely true because there is a difference between quantitative understanding and qualitative understanding. I can understand the ocean by just taking a drop out of the ocean. And I just analyze the drop and the chemical substance, and then, okay, now I have an understanding of the total ocean. But obviously, the drop is vastly different from the massive ocean. Even though it is qualitatively the same, it is quantitatively different. So this is our relationship with Krishna. We are qualitatively the same, but quantitatively we are different. And that difference is the infinity versus the finite. We are finite, Krishna is infinite. So there's always this kind of mystery in that relationship.
I have a small question actually. This always comes to my mind, like in our scriptures, in the Prabhupada books, it is mentioned that material world is 1/3 of the total creation. Spiritual world is 3/4 and material world is 1/3. But then we also see
I think it's 1/4.
1/4.
Yeah.
1/4 and yeah, 3/4. So, but then we also see like material world is just a small.
Yeah.
In the whole creation.
It's, the moment you start talking about those realms of infinity, then you can use all kinds of analogies and comparisons, but the comparisons never match the reality because, the nature of reality is so much more infinitely greater than our ability to understand it. But again, the point is qualitatively we can understand. And I always use the example that, well, people say we are so finite, so therefore how can we ever have a chance of having knowledge? So yeah, we can have knowledge. Just look at it like this. I just drove from Holland to Germany. So I needed a road map, right? So the road map, I've also had a navigation system, GPS system, but previously you had a paper map. I still have them because sometimes they're very useful. The map is only this big. I drove from Baarn to here, it's 250 kilometers. It's a lot bigger than my map. But still, because the map was accurate, I was able to go perfectly and arrive at this point exactly in time. Because I had an accurate, good map. So Vedic knowledge is like the good map. It gives you the overview. It doesn't explain every detail. Don't think the Vedas will give you instruction how to change your tire on a car. And well, the Vedas are not complete because you don't give knowledge about how to change the tire of your car. So how can I trust this? Look, if you enter into the realm of the universe and all of its complexities, it is infinitely complex, and there's no body of work that could ever explain all the details. So the Vedas don't pretend to give that kind of knowledge. Although sometimes they get very detailed, but the Vedic knowledge is basically gives you the map, it gives you the overview, so that you're here and you're an A and you have to go to B and to C, and it gives you the road how to get there. But the map has to be accurate. So if you have the wrong map and you take Shankaracharya's map, I might be ending up in Vladivostok right now instead of here in Cologne. So you have to have a good map. It's as simple as that. Not just because a map is a map, therefore they are correct. You have to distinguish between correct maps and incorrect maps. So the Vaishnava Vedanta philosophy is the correct map. There's lots of other maps, and some of them may be a little bit correct, and some of them are totally incorrect. So make sure you use the right map. Any other questions?
I have one question.
Yes.
Like many times we read there's like Atma and Jiva. So like Jiva, like I don't know, we always have discovery of false ego, intelligence, and mind. So does Jiva consider all these factors, or is just the soul? And
No, this is Jiva, Atma, soul is the same.
say
Yeah.
and
Different words for the same thing.
and then who has the desire? It is combination of all these. Or
Who has the? The soul has desire.
Yes.
Yeah. The soul has intrinsically consciousness, and consciousness consists of four fundamental features: willpower, desire, intelligent perception, emotional perception. So emotional, intelligent perceptions are passive, willpower and desires are active. So we have will, and our will is fed by a certain desire. Then we have intelligent perception, by which we can calculate how to fulfill that desire. And then we have emotional perception, that if we do the right thing, we feel good. So that's the complexity. Consciousness consists of all these things. They're very different things, yet they're part of the same thing, which is the jiva. So that makes consciousness so complicated.
So the samskaras we have, we carry forward in life after life. So they are imprinted in like jiva has all this, or like they are into this mind or intelligence, what ego.
No, the seat of consciousness is the soul, the jiva. The mind is not in itself conscious. The mind is perceived by the soul, by the consciousness. The mind is like the subtle screen, the movie screen, and we are sitting in the theater, and the screen is projected on the images are projected on the screen, and the images basically are fed by the senses. So the senses create input. That input comes together in a subtle energy, which is called mind, the astral body, the subtle body. And that subtle body in turn is perceived by the soul. So there are steps. It's like when I'm speaking, you can hear the sound, goes into your ear. The ear translates it into an electrical chemical code that passes on to the brain. But in the brain, it's translated into a sound, and that somehow made you aware of that sound. So it's an indirect process. Our process of perception is indirect. It's called, in philosophy, it's called representationalism. That the way that we look at the world, our consciousness is never touching the world directly. It's touching the world through senses and sense means like light and sound and other tools that enters into the body, stimulates the nervous system stimulates the brain, and that's where the picture is emerging in the form of a mental image that's being perceived by the soul. So basically all conscious activities is embedded in the soul itself. Does that explain? Any other questions?
What's the material of the thinking?
The what?
What is the material of the thinking?
Oh, the material, that's the subtle material energy. We have gross material energy made of basically atoms and subatomic particles. And there is a more subtle energy. It's an astral energy, which is more subtle. It's even more subtle than electricity. And that constitutes the subtle body. And the subtle body is where the mind and the intelligence reside. But the mind itself is not intelligent. The intelligence is not itself intelligence. The real intelligence is the soul that feeds it with consciousness. But it uses these instruments to be able to interact with the material world, because we're in this body. So we need all these facilities to be able to interact with this body and with the world around us.
It means intelligence detail is quite different from the thinking.
The thinking takes place by the means of the subtle body, the astral body, but the awareness of the thinking, the actual conscious experience, takes place in the soul. Only the soul is conscious. The body and the mind are not conscious. They appear conscious because they're being fed by the soul, but the soul is the only entity that's actually conscious.
The relationship between soul and super soul. And what you have said.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting relationship, the relationship between the soul and the super soul, Krishna, being infinite, expands himself into basically the super soul in every jiva. In fact, it's stated he is at the heart of every atom. So Krishna is able to expand himself infinitely, and in order to maintain connection with his creation, including us, his jivas, his souls, he manifests himself through the super soul, and that's our connection. So we are constantly connected to Krishna, yet we do not know it. All the energy that we get in terms of consciousness, in terms of awareness, in terms of desire, willpower, in the end, is connected to the super soul, because that is the real source of consciousness. The soul is individually, separately conscious, but it's connected to the super soul. Just you can compare it like this light bulb. It's connected to a wire, and that wire is connected to a power station. So without the power station and without the wire, there would be no light. Now, if the power station is on and the wire is on and the light bulb is connected, but you put a dimmer in between, then there will still be some light, but it will be dimmed. The dimmer is our ego. So when we, part of the process of Krishna consciousness, sadhana bhakti, is to cleanse the mind, to cleanse the heart, whereby the dimmer is reduced and the connection that you have at the power station, which is always there, but it's dimmed in our materially conditioned state. When we remove that conditioning, the dimming disappears and the flow of consciousness, and that's what we call enlightenment. That's when a soul can achieve a state of enlightened blissfulness, which is the ultimate goal of Krishna consciousness, to realize that. By reconnecting and removing the dimmer is like the ego. And once we remove that ego and we surrender to the source, because ego means we don't want to surrender. That's the whole idea of ego, because we are proud, we want to be independent. So we remove that, we surrender to that. Then the flow of energy will start flowing the way it should be flowing. And then we have the full ability, the light bulb, which is fed by the full flow of electricity, will give a radiant light. So the soul gets enlightened, gets liberated, then he will be a radiant light reflecting Krishna in every aspect. Yes?
Is it possible, you said that Krishna is expanding himself, is it possible to influence this?
To what?
To influence this?
To influence this process of expansion? No. Then you would have to be Krishna.
Is it possible to influence the process of expansion? Krishna is expanding all the time. Is it possible to influence this process of expansion? Expansion. He is expanding all the time. Is it possible to influence, to do something for this process?
Well, in order to be able to influence the expansion of Krishna, you have to be Krishna, and we are not. So there's nothing we can do about it.
Mother
I think-
can stop expanding Krishna in love.
Maybe if you ask him very nicely,
Yeah, with love.
he says, "Oh, you know,
I can tie you.
Any other questions? I think it's time, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
now actually we have a possibility to ask more questions in the Sunday festival program. So we will continue this.
Okay, yeah, that's for the Sunday program.
Yes.
Right? You have other guests.
Yes, we will have all the rest.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for this very enlightening talk, and you are touching so many different aspects, and it is very thought provoking, very like giving a lot of thoughts for like many of the questions are there in the minds, and we have to digest it now and maybe in the Sunday festival, we will again have the chance to listen to Prabhu in a more detailed way. And yes, we invite everyone to come to the Sunday festival at 2 o'clock. The class will be there. Thank you again. And we want to. Yeah,
I want to thank you again for inviting me and really enjoy being with devotees and being here at the temple. It's a fantastic experience. I've never been at the Cologne temple before. So really appreciate it. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks very much for all your association and being here. And I hope to be able to be here many more times in the future. Now I discovered this place.
Yes, yes, we will be very blessed with your more presence here and more guidance about it. Yes, and we want to thank Prabhu by saying Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Prabhu ki jai.
Sorry, I didn't want to ask the question because I'm afraid to ask stupid questions.
No, listen,
See, so if you
no questions.
sit here and what is it?